So let's do this. We're back, and we actually recorded the previous episode probably about 3 months ago, I would say. So we're back with Joan of Arc. We recorded the previous episode about 3 months ago. We still haven't released it. I've recorded that plus the reading and still haven't released it. So you're probably going to get like a quick succession video. I'm in a slightly different location, and back with us, the greatest of them all. Joseph, why don't you talk about yourself for a second?
Well, I'm not all that great, but I've gotten greater than before as our main channel has reached 1,000 subs, and the History Corner is at 300 and some subs. And over on the most important channel of them all, Storyfire, we're starting to get some growth at 55 subs now.
Nice. So you can follow Joseph. We'll bring up your handles now. What are your handles?
Well, you can find me at The Brothers Crin on YouTube, which is my main fantasy channel. You can find me on the History Corner, where these videos are often posted. And also on Storyfire, where I'm also to be found there. Often posting and publishing Narnia videos, Star Wars stuff, history, and all sorts of other videos, which are really, really fun to make.
All the good stuff. And you can follow me. I'm Vino Fire on Storyfire, and you can follow me at Two Mates and a Dog. That's me and my friend, and his dog Husky. His Husky Kiba. Wow, words, brain, engage. And we're just about to drop a video where we went to Turin, so that will be up by now. We've got a video out in Chamonix. We've got a video in Mont Saint Michel, which is right in the territory of this book. That's coming out in about 2 months because we're visiting there in about 6 weeks. So come follow us as well.
All of your handles, all the links will be posted if you're watching this on YouTube, in either the description or the comment section. So do check it out. Trust me, the Two Mates and a Dog videos are a great blast to watch. I've rewatched several of them several times.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Well, Kiba is the most beautiful husky in the world. He's coming here in 45 minutes. I can't wait to see him. Okay, so it's chapter 9, not chapter 8, isn't it? So chapter 9, she is made General-in-Chief. Tell me what you thought about that chapter, Joseph. What were your main standout points?
At long last, Le Tremoille has been delaying them endlessly and just trying to waste time and just prevaricate and slow her down. Now, I also like to read a lot of Roman history and fictional history or whatever. And this is very reminiscent of what happened with Scipio Africanus when he was saying, all right, I've got Hannibal and Carthage on the ropes. Let me go to Africa and finally take the fight to them. And the Senate said, no. They kept delaying and delaying and delaying, not wanting him to get the glory. Same thing happened with Augustus when he wanted to push against Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra at one point. They kept delaying and delaying and delaying and delaying. And these farcical fools risked their very civilization, Rome, on just mere ego and stupidity. And it was until the last hour that, basically these two figures managed to finally press on ahead. Augustus had slightly more difficulties. Scipio Africanus had to basically patch together, honestly, a pretty questionable army with not much experience in comparison to Hannibal's trained mercenaries to go march into Africa and fight them. So in terms of literature, this honestly reminds me of some of the novels I've read of those two. So how about you?
So I took a side note to this as well. So like in the second to last paragraph, it starts out, General of the armies of France with Prince of the Blood for subordinate. Yesterday she was nothing. Today she was this meteoric rise very quickly. And I thought about it, and I've mentioned a number of times in this, very biblical references, very scriptural references. And there are two characters that this is very, very true of. So Joseph, he was cast out by his brothers, despised by his brothers. He ends up in prison, and then he's second only to Pharaoh. And and the second character that happens to is Daniel. Daniel is taken away in captivity, taken to the Babylonians. He shows himself to be a worthy prophet, and then he's brought before either Nebuchadnezzar or Belshazzar. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but he's brought before them, and he's the only one that can interpret a dream, and then he's second only to the king, and so he goes from nothing from a captive to second only in the land. And here we have the same scenario happening to Joan of Arc. And I think what Mark Twain is doing here is giving her sort of like kudos from a biblical sense, because of course she
and he's also doing another thing. It also reminds me of Henry IV from Shakespeare.
Go on.
There's a great quote. I forget what it is. I've got it on my shelf, the completed works of Shakespeare. But there's a line which you pretty much have Henry IV who says, "Like a comet I was, that men would say to their sons, 'This is he.'" So that, he rose, he was like a comet. Men wondered at him, is what he's saying. And here, the same kind of implication is being done here. So this is a very, very, this is a great paragraph, and the funny thing is that it's very historical. She did rise one day to the next, became chief, but it also makes me think that of a saying from Chinese literature, I think it was, that those who rise at twice the speed of other men are destined to fall twice as fast.
Interesting. So, chapter 10, The Maid's Sword and Banner. Love this chapter. What it represents. It's such a great chapter. It's a great follow-up to the Paladin from last time. Take it away. Tell us what you thought. What were your takeaway points from it?
Well, two main things. We've got the story of the sword, which legend has it that Jeanne's voices actually did know where to find a sword, which may have belonged to either Charles Martel or Charlemagne. It varies on the story. But there are legends that it may have been Joyeuse itself, Charlemagne's famous sword. I'm not sure about that one, but the sword was apparently never used to slay a man, but was simply hung at her belt. Historically, Jeanne never actually slew anyone by her own hands, which is pretty remarkable. As for the very act of discovering an early Carolingian sword, that bit just bespeaks of legitimacy, and I'm going to be honest, there's no deed quite like this in literature, to an extent, in historic fiction. So it is something that honestly is pretty darn remarkable, and it connects her directly with the likes of Charles Martel and Charlemagne, as mentioned, both of whom were two of the greatest monarchs in French history. Charles Martel saved France in several battles from the Islamic conquests coming in from Spain. And Charlemagne not only did that, but expanded what he inherited from his father Pépin le Bref into an empire that spanned a good chunk of Europe. And honestly, Charlemagne may have been the greatest Western European monarch ever. So, and I'm going to be honest, I'm a big fan of Charlemagne, so this charmed the boots off me.
Fair enough.
But there's also, real quick, it was discovered behind the altar of Saint Catherine, one of Jeanne's saints.
Yep.
near Fiaubois. Fiaubois means proud wood. So this is quite a important name, and quite an impressive one. Proudwood, which I imagine Tolkien probably liked that name because he liked wood and he was very proud. I have to poke fun. I'm sorry. I love you, English, but I have to poke fun at you all. That said, she also gets a Scotsman, James Power. He apparently designs her, along with her standard, which involves, well, le lit de France. It's a bit of a weird thing with the crown and a bit of an image of God matched by the lilies, which Jeanne historically did get permission to wear the coat of the royal family, which this was an accomplishment. Like, this was, I don't think there's almost anyone in French history who ever got the right to do this. This was a incredible deed. Like, this was incredible. It was just unparalleled in French history. Yeah, what about you?
So I'll leave that section of the chapter then behind because I think you've covered it quite nicely.
I was just going to say, it's interesting. It's also important to note that a Scotsman helps her design it, because the Scots at this time were the greatest source of help the French could ask for. Yeah, the French would have long since lost and surrendered were it not for the Scots. And the bond of friendship between Scotland and France can never be understated.
What I really liked is we've got this contrast now. Last time we saw the Paladin in all his pomp and glory, and now we're seeing a humble version of him. You know, he's finally actually understands he's not really worthy of anything. He's too embarrassed to go before her in front of actually what is real men-at-arms. And he stays back. And in reality, she was finally going to give him some glory. Yeah, so it says, the Paladin entered humbly. He ventured no farther than just within the door. He stopped there looking embarrassed and afraid. Then Joan spoke pleasantly and said, and it follows on from there. But that's him. And so actually the truth of him is that, and it's no wonder she actually has great affection for him. She sees past all the pomp and bluster and look at me and knows that deep down inside, just like Noël Ranguisson knows, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And I love that. And then it digs deeper into that. Oh, pencil. It digs deeper into that because Noël says, well, I had something to do with that. I was a part of the building of him, etc. And I just love that. It's all the dynamic interplays between all the characters. It's great. Chapter 11, the war march has begun.
I love the Paladin's quote here. If I ever disgrace this trust, my comrades here will know how to do a friend's office upon my body in this charge. I lay upon them as knowing they will not fail me. Like, he says this very unsteady and very moved.
And I feel like he's referring to Noël there. Like, he's put all those words out there. And Noël has kept track of every single word. So at the start of chapter 11, it says, Noël and I went back together, silent at first and impressed. Finally, Noël came up out of his thinkings and said, the first shall be last and the last first. And that is a direct quote from Jesus. And I just love that, the way, again, he can't help but pull it in. He's constantly pulling in those little threads. I just think it's very, very clever that he's woven that into the book. But you, after you, Joseph, what are you seeing in this chapter?
Well, first off, there was that quote, which I did, like I always say, I'm not usually as good at recognizing biblical verse, but that one I definitely noticed, and that one caught my eye. We also have on at least page 184 of my edition, there's reference, let me see if I can find it, to Jeanne's, she's got the creating mouth as well as the seeing eye. Yeah, the seeing eye,
Yes.
which, as you mentioned, discerns and sees past all the bluster, all the um, flaws into the very heart and soul of the man or woman that she sets her eyes upon. I'm just going to real quickly give a great deal of credit to one of my favorite writers, Tolkien, in that Tolkien later uses this idea of the seeing eye with Gandalf, who sees past all the cowardice, all the bluster of the likes of Bilbo, Frodo, Sam, and even Boromir at one point sees right to the heart of them. And, he's able to draw the good and the best out of people, but also discern who is good and who is rotten. So this is something Tolkien obviously read and obviously makes reference to. As to creating
Yes.
mouth, it's referenced by Noel that France was cowed and a coward, and Jeanne d'Arc has spoken, and France is marching with her head up. I'll even go as far as to say that Jeanne is one of probably 3 great French figures who had this gift, with France 2 other times being fairly well cowed, and that was around the time of Napoleon. And Napoleon spoke, and France became courageous and brave. And the same thing happened in the Second World War with Charles de Gaulle. So Jeanne is the first of these great majestic figures who she's got this gift for the French, just turning France at her most cowardly into France at her most beautiful and into the most beautiful and courageous and chivalrous of countries.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what I found interesting with that? So you've paid homage to Tolkien. I'm going to take it back again, biblical. So the prophet Samuel was commissioned to appoint the next king, and he was sent to the house of Jesse, and there were the sons, and each of the sons came forward, and he assumed that it must be this one and it must be that one. Why? He looks good, he's brave, he's strong, he's courageous, all these different things that Samuel saw in each of these sons. And in the end it was David, who was ruddy, which I believe sort of means red and pretty. And he was the smallest, but God picked that one to be the leader. And so Samuel understood that he could only see what man sees. He didn't see what God sees. And so I believe that's where Mark Twain is taking this from. I believe that's where he's drawing the concept from.
Yeah, there's also a few references with Jesus where he says that God will make, God can bestow upon men more vigor and valor than they previously thought. You only see the image, God sees into the very hearts of men. There's also something else interesting. I remember a historian, I think an English one, who was very pro-French, who said the English in the 100 Years' War hammered national consciousness into the French, just as they previously did into the Scots. But I'm actually going to disagree with that statement and say, yes, the English hammered it into the Scots. But I'm going to go as far as to say that the French did not have it hammered into them by the English, but by Jeanne d'Arc. She kind of inspired in them national consciousness.
It seems like she drew it out of their hearts. So they already had it and she just drew it out. It sprung forth. Very good point. I love that. I really love that. Chapter 12, Joan puts heart into her army, following on exactly from what you just said. So from this chapter, if you were to sum up how did Joan put heart into her army, what would you say was the answer?
She, I don't want to say cowed, but she put Lahir in his place and befriended him and got him to go pray. And she, honestly, she got them to start thinking about what it is that they are fighting for, in a way. She called out not to their not to physical desires or immediate wants, but to think on their souls and to dig deep into their hearts and find, what do you want to leave behind? What are you doing here, in a way? She really called out to their spirits, not their emotions, not their desires, their spirits. And she reached the French, at least in this scene or this chapter. She inspired in them through their faith. At least that's how I read it. And this is really like La Hille. She also forbade him from cussing, which that's basically his. Well, I have a friend from Quebec, Zero Sum, who I've been also occasionally streaming with, and he described it as French cussing is the national anthem of Quebec. And he said, when you're cussing in French, you are really singing the praises of Quebec in France. And the trouble is, that's how all Frenchmen feel. Like, oh yeah, we think of our cussing as funny and fun to do, even when there's no reason to do it. But Jeanne is basically saying, that's not right. That's, like, even I take pleasure in some of my explosion of oaths, as Mark Twain would put it, when in French. But in English, I don't like cussing as much in English, more because I have a sense that it's not quite as proper. Whereas in French, I don't mind. It's a bit of a game. But Jeanne here is saying that's not right. And, you know, like, she's also, later, after she tames La Hille, she's rearranging the board in terms of strategy. But the best part is that she manages to convince La Hille to begin praying. And she gets a guy who was, according to the novel, previously an atheist. She converts him to the faith. And to an extent, her urging reminds me of also, come follow me, I will make you a fisherman a fisher of men, rather than fisherman. I don't know if I got that right. But it's also like that. But there's another thing here.
You did?
That I'm reminded of. And it is something that is very interesting about France and Scotland at this time. Whenever they tried to just go out and meet the English in open battle, they would often lose. But there's something almost striking about one thing. At Bannockburn and at, like, some of the battles with Jeanne d'Arc, what the French and the Scots would do is they would bend down and start praying before the battle, calling for God to help them. And then they'd pick up their weapons, march out, and in the cases of Bannockburn and under Jeanne, they would then win. And there's something in their religious fervor. Basically, what Robert the Bruce and Jeanne were turning this into, in a way, was a crusade for their homeland. You are mixing religion with battle, in a way. And the English, I don't want to say didn't know how to handle this. They did, but they weren't fighting with the same vigor that they were under Edward III, for example, or the Black Prince.
No, indeed. I think that's quite clear in the next chapter. I think that comes out quite a lot in the next, not the next chapter, a chapter after that. Just a point to all of that I noticed quite heavily in her taming of La Hire. And La Hire, if you're trying to, I think he's the maniac's maniac. You know, like, if you're a group of maniacs, they go, well, yeah, but we don't mess with La Hire. So they'd mess with each other. They would sleep with their prostitutes. They would fight and scrap and get angry. But La Hire is here. No, we do as he says. Even if it's in a strange way, even if it's not with order, we do as he says. He's the maniac's maniac. Yeah, so you've got him walking along with this slight Joan of Arc. And to me, they're a yin and a yang. You see, at the centre of his black, dangerous, wild, maniacal side of him, deep within him, there's this obedient, good, honest, humble character who can stoop down to the level of what was to him was a childish little girl. And from her, this bright, angelic creature, at the heart of her was the ability to go to war and be just like Lair. And so you are seeing this yin and yang character sort of coalesce around each other and find each other within each other. It's a fantastic dichotomy of characters, I think.
My favorite scene in this chapter, though, is when Louis, our narrator, discovers Jeanne crying and laughing as she hears Lahil's prayer. Fair God, Sir God, I pray you to do by Lahil as he would do by you if you were Lahil and he were God. It is such a silly prayer. But there's a sincerity there. Lahil, I just love this scene.
Well, do you know what I like about it? Is in some ways it's a self-centered version of saying do to others as you would have done to yourself. Now, that quote from Jesus is often missaid. It's people say don't do to others what you wouldn't have them do to you. But it's not. He said he was actioning it. He said go and do to others what you want them to do to you. So one's inaction, one's action. And he's saying, yeah, look, if I was you and I could see me, I know how I'd treat you. I'd treat you well. So do that one. And I love that about it. It's fantastic. In mine, there's notes that prayer was actually archived. It's in the National Archive of France and was repeated many times, but it originates with Lair. Okay, final chapter. Chapter 13. Checked by the folly of the wise men. Of the wise, sorry. Checked by the folly of the wise. This chapter, for me, resonated so much because I've seen something like this many, many times in my life where people who think they're smarter come up with a smarter plan based on their own wisdom, but if they just listen to what they were told to do, they'd be fine. But they don't because they think they know more. And they've all in their own way acknowledged that this girl is somehow blessed by God. They all understand that she is the route by which they will gain success, but they still only treat her as a talisman. And when she discovers that they've gone, look, we'll listen to her, but we'll do our own thing. When she discovers it and she says, all right, back we go. I go, yes. It's a scriptural concept. It's obedience is greater than sacrifice, but obedience is a sacrifice. And they weren't obedient, so now they've got to give a sacrifice. And it's a 3-day march back to go forward. Fantastic chapter. Sad chapter, but fantastic to see her take control like that and not give in and go, okay, well, we'll come up with a new plan. She just goes, nope. Powerful. Your thoughts?
Well, I like how she puts them in their place and says, yes, a blunder has been made, and except God take your proper work upon himself and change the wind and correct your blunder for you. There is none else that can devise a remedy. And she just tells them, like, you're idiots. And, you've put me in a situation where I have to clean up your mess here. And I like how she says, you see here the army? Yes. It is here on this side by advice of your council. Yes. Now in God's name, can that wise council explain why it is better to have it here than it would be to have it in the bottom of the sea? Like, she's treating Genois like he's a child.
Yeah.
And she's even talking to him like that. Like, answer me this, good sir. Has the army any value on this side of the river? I love that scene. She's just like, okay, you want to be smart? Here, let me treat you like the idiot you are. And proceeds to talk to him like he's a child. And he's kind of going, oh, yeah, I done screwed up.
Because in his head, he played chess. In his head, he played the game of chess, worked out what the best thing to do was, then gets there and goes, I really was not playing chess. I was playing checkers. It's, he knows.
There's a difference between playing chess in your head, because what you're playing in your head will never match what's on the board. You have to play the game on the board. You need to see it to make the best possible move. Yes, you can plan the next 3 moves ahead of your opponent, but you must never lose sight of the board in front of you. Otherwise, well, you're going to get outmaneuvered. That's often the rule with chess. At the end of the chapter, she rides into the cathedral and prays there after showing her fearlessness, which amazes the people. And they apparently go nuts with the joy bells and the welcoming cannon. Well, as a friend of mine said, so they basically went and got even more French than before. When I said, oh yeah, they go nuts at the end of the chapter, so they go even more French.
It's a great set of chapters we've just read. There's no bad chapters in this, but like they draw you in more and more as you go along. I hope you're really enjoying it, guys. We're going to follow this up again soon. Probably a couple of weeks. We'll get the next set of chapters. I would imagine we'll go 14, 16, 17, maybe 18. Yeah, let's go 14 to 18. I think that's going to be a good chunk. I hope you're really enjoying it. You can listen into the reading of it. Please do. There'll be a link for that. Thank you very much, Joseph, for another lovely 40 minutes discussing Joan of Arc.
Thank you. Pleasure was all mine.
Oh, well, that's too kind. I will see you next time.
And don't forget, everyone, to smash that like and that subscribe button wherever you're watching this.